This elderly farmer maintained his faith in God, even in the most difficult moment of his life. The small town of Clearwater Valley held within it the secret of time. Nestled between towering mountains that seemed to brush the sky, it was a place where past and present intertwined in perfect harmony. At sunrise, the golden light painted the modest adobe and stone houses, while the wind whispered ancient stories through the leaves of century-old trees. Life there was simple, with the dry land symbolizing both the struggle and the hope of its people. It was in this setting that Joshua was born, grew up and grew old, a man whose existence was woven into the essence of that place. His deep brown eyes carried the serenity of someone who had witnessed countless cycles of life and death. His hands, hardened by unceasing work with the soil, told tales of persistence and dedication. At 78, his lean frame, slightly bent under the weight of time, still held the strength and resolve of someone who had never known the meaning of the word quit. From a young age, Joshua understood that his life's purpose was bound to that soil. While others left in search of dreams in the big city, he remained loyal to the land his ancestors had cultivated. Every dawn, with the stars still visible in the sky, he rose to fulfill his sacred ritual. Kneeling before a small image of St. Francis, patron of farmers, he whispered his daily prayer. "Lord, bless these hands and this land. May every seed planted be an act of faith, and may every harvest be a testament to your goodness." In Clearwater Valley, time wasn't measured by clocks, but by planting cycles and seasons that followed one another with unrelenting regularity. There were years of abundance when the rains came just right, and Joshua's barn overflowed with grain. But there were also periods of devastating drought, when the sky seemed to have forgotten that patch of earth, and the relentless sun drained every drop of moisture from the soil. During one of these droughts, perhaps the worst the region had ever faced, Joshua's true depth of faith became clear. Nearly 2 years had passed without any significant rainfall. Creeks had dried up, turning into scars across the landscape. Wells offered only a trickle of muddy water. The once lush green fields had become stretches of cracked, barren earth. The townspeople began abandoning their homes. Entire families left in sorrowful caravans, taking with them whatever little they could salvage. "Come with us, Joshua," his neighbors begged. "This land has nothing more to give. There's only death here now." But Joshua, his chapped lips curving into a calm smile, gently refused. "Faith isn't for the days of plenty," he said, his voice soft yet filled with unshakable conviction. "Faith is for when all seems lost. It's when the world says it's over that we need to believe it's just beginning." So while everyone else departed, Joshua remained. Each morning before sunrise, he would head to his small field, now a miniature desert. With worn-out tools, he tilled the parched soil, preparing it as though the rain were on its way. With his usual careful gestures, he planted his saved seeds, covering them with dirt and his unwavering faith. Those few who stayed watched him with a mixture of compassion and disbelief. To them, Joshua had lost his mind. What kind of man sows seeds in dry earth? What kind of fool expects a harvest where no life exists? "It's his age," they whispered among themselves. "Old Joshua just can't see reality anymore." What they failed to grasp was that, for Joshua, reality wasn't limited to what the eyes could see. His vision went beyond the arid surface. With the eyes of his soul, he perceived what could be. Every motion of his hand, every seed he planted, was a silent declaration of faith, a statement that even in the deepest darkness, one can believe in the light. Weeks turned into months, and the situation only worsened. The hot, dry wind whipped up dust clouds, making the air nearly impossible to breathe. The few remaining animals in town were wasting away, unable to find food or water. Those still hanging on in Clearwater Valley began to fall ill, victims of hunger and thirst. Late one stifling night, when the sky seemed more distant and indifferent than ever, Joshua knelt in his field. The stars shone coldly overhead, silent, witnesses to his anguish. His tears, rare and precious in a body so depleted, fell on the barren ground. Yet instead of despair or surrender, his words were filled with absolute devotion. Lord, I know you hear me, even when the heavens are silent. I know you see me, even when the darkness seems impenetrable. I don't ask for rain just for my sake, but for this land that suffers so. I don't pray for my own harvest, but for the life that refuses to abandon this place. If it is your will that I die on this soil, so be it. But as long as there's breath in my body, I'll keep planting. Because believing when all signs point otherwise is the true act of faith. What Joshua didn't know was that his words, so pure and genuine, were heard not only by a divine ear, but also by a very human one. Hidden among the shadows of the withered trees, a man watched with deep interest. Known around those parts as Elder Anselm, he was a figure wrapped in mystery and respect. No one knew his exact age. Some claimed he'd lived a full century, but all recognized in him a wisdom that went beyond the ordinary. Elder Anselm had traveled to distant lands, studied under sages of different traditions, and, so the stories said, had unraveled secrets most people would never understand. He had returned to the region of his childhood, drawn by recurring dreams and premonitions that led him back to Clearwater Valley. Early the next morning, while Joshua worked his field, Elder Anselm approached him quietly. "Vine sprouts you have there?" he remarked, pointing at the bone-dry ground. Joshua looked up, startled at the unexpected presence. There was something in the man's gaze that radiated an immediate calm. "They haven't sprouted yet," Joshua replied simply. "But they will." Elder Anselm smiled, a smile that seemed to carry the knowledge of countless ages. "They've already sprouted, my friend. You just can't see them yet. But they're there, growing in the dimension of faith before they appear in the physical world." Those words moved Joshua in ways he couldn't explain, as though this stranger finally understood the language of his heart. "Who are you?" he asked, genuinely curious. "Someone who, like you, has learned that visible reality is only a fraction of what truly exists," Elder Anselm replied. "I witnessed your devotion last night. I saw your tears fall upon this land, and I recognized something rare in you. A man whose faith does not depend on immediate results, but who believes simply for the joy of believing." In the days that followed, a deep friendship blossomed between the two men. Elder Anselm, with his wealth of knowledge and experience, discovered in Joshua a simplicity and purity of heart that fascinated him. For Joshua, in turn, Elder Anselm was someone who could finally articulate what he had always felt intuitively. Faith, Elder Anselm explained during one of their long talks in the sparse shade of a nearly leafless mesquite tree, is not believing God will do what we want. It's the certainty that no matter what happens, we are aligned with a higher purpose. It's understanding we are part of a cosmic tapestry where each thread, however insignificant it may seem, has its role in the grand design. Joshua nodded, seeing in these words the heart of his own experience. "When I plant," he shared, "I'm not just putting seeds in the ground. I'm taking part in a miracle. I'm witnessing how something so small and seemingly lifeless can become abundant life. And even if sometimes the seed doesn't germinate, the act of planting itself is a celebration of possibility, a statement that I believe in tomorrow." Elder Anselm admired how this humble man, without formal education or theoretical knowledge, had achieved a profound insight into life's mysteries simply by staying connected to the earth and the divine. One scorching afternoon, Elder Anselm invited Joshua for a trek to a place known as the Silent Rock, a formation at the top of a hill from which the entire valley could be surveyed. The path was steep and difficult, especially for two older men under the oppressive heat. But there was an urgency in the invitation that Joshua couldn't refuse. When they finally reached the summit, exhausted and gasping for breath, they sat, side by side, gazing at the desolate vista that stretched before them. The valley, once lush and green, was now a monotonous sweep of cracked soil and dying vegetation. "What do you see?" Elder Anselm asked, pointing to the horizon. Joshua studied the scene in silence for a long time before replying. "I see suffering. I see a land begging for relief, but I also see beauty in the resilience of the few trees that still stand. I see hope in the tiny green patches that persist, even under the merciless sun. Elder Anselm nodded, pleased with his answer. You see with the eyes of the soul, that is a rare gift. After a quiet moment of reflection, he continued, Joshua, have you ever wondered why you keep planting, even when all signs say there'll be no harvest? The question caught Joshua off guard. He had never consciously thought about it. Planting was simply what he did, what he had always done. It was his way of being in the world, his way of conversing with the divine. I plant because I need to, he answered at last, because each seed I place in the ground is a declaration of faith. It's my way of telling the universe that despite all appearances, I still believe in life. Exactly, Elder. Anselm agreed, his eyes shining with a special brightness. And that's why, of all the fields in this valley, yours will be the first to flourish when the rains finally come. Spoken with such conviction, those words made Joshua's heart race. You truly believe the rains will come. It's not a matter of belief, my friend. It's a certainty. Just as surely as the sun will set tonight and rise tomorrow, the rains will come. And your faith, your resolve to plant when everyone else has given up, has prepared the soil for a miracle. As they walked back down the hill, Elder Anselm shared something he had kept secret until then. In my journeys, he confided, I learned to read nature's signs, the patterns of the stars, the behavior of animals, the direction of the winds. They all tell a story to those who know how to listen. The story they are telling now is one of imminent transformation. This drought is coming to an end, Joshua. The cycle is almost complete. Joshua listened carefully, torn between hope and skepticism. After so many months of a sky endlessly blue, the gift of rain felt unimaginable. Still, something about Elder Anselm's conviction struck a chord deep within him. That night, as he lay in his simple bed, Joshua dreamed vividly. He stood in his field, but the scene was transformed. The ground, once cracked and barren, was now covered in a lush carpet of vibrant green shoots. The sky was heavy with dark clouds, promising abundant rain. And in the center of the field stood a magnificent tree, its strong branches stretching out in every direction, offering cool shade and abundant fruit. In the dream, Joshua approached the tree, overwhelmed by an inexplicable connection. Touching its solid trunk, he felt a rhythmic pulse that echoed the beating of his own heart. He understood, in that moment of dreamlike clarity, that this tree was a manifestation of his faith. Every day spent under the searing sun, every seed planted in seemingly infertile ground, every whispered prayer at dawn, all had contributed to the growth of that splendid tree. He woke at first light, feeling renewed and inexplicably buoyant. Stepping outside, he noticed something different in the air, an almost imperceptible hint of moisture. But to someone accustomed to extreme dryness, it felt like a sign of change. He ran to his field, propelled by a burst of energy he hadn't felt in years. And there, to his surprise and joy, he saw what no one else could have imagined: tiny green shoots, hesitantly breaking through the soil. The sprouts Elder Anselm had spoken of, existent first in the realm of faith before manifesting in the physical, were now visible to the naked eye. Falling to his knees, Joshua reverently touched those delicate signs of life. Tears of gratitude rolled freely down the furrows of his face. "Thank you, Lord," he whispered, voice quavering with emotion. "Thank you for letting me witness this miracle." In that moment of quiet awe, he felt a single drop of rain fall on his outstretched hand. Small, almost shy. Then another, and another. Within minutes, a gentle drizzle had become a generous downpour, soaking the thirsty earth and washing Joshua's spirit clean. Word of rain spread quickly through the surrounding area. Those few residents still in Clearwater Valley stepped outside, hardly able to believe the water falling on their faces. They hurried to Joshua's field, drawn by an inexplicable rumor that something extraordinary was happening there. What they found defied all logic and comprehension. While the rain was falling evenly across the valley, it was on Joshua's field that it seemed to reveal its true purpose. The tiny sprouts he had seen just hours earlier now seemed to be growing, before their very eyes, reaching toward the sky with an almost supernatural vitality. And in the center of the field, exactly as in his dream, there stood a tree. Not just any tree, but a species no one in town had ever seen. Its sturdy trunk, abundant canopy, and intensely green leaves seemed to defy every natural law. It was as if years of growth had been compressed into mere minutes. The townspeople watched, stunned by this unfolding spectacle of transformation in life. Some dropped to their knees, overcome with reverence in the face of the inexplicable. Others wept openly, sensing they were witnessing something that surpassed human understanding. From a distance, Elder Anselm observed with a calm smile. He had fulfilled his mission by recognizing in Joshua what many would call a keeper of faith, someone whose belief is so pure and steadfast that it can literally change the course of reality. In the days that followed, Clearwater Valley underwent a complete metamorphosis. The rain, which fell for 3 days without pause, returned life to the region. Creeks began flowing again, wells filled to the brim, and the vegetation grew back with surprising vigor. Families who had left started returning, lured by news that the valley was flourishing once more. But the true miracle, the one that truly drew people back, wasn't just the rain or the renewed land. It was Joshua's story, the old farmer who had never stopped believing. His unwavering habit of sowing seeds even when everyone else had given up became a legend, spreading far beyond the valley's borders. And the mysterious tree in his field, still growing with awe-inspiring vitality, became a symbol and a place of pilgrimage. People of all ages and backgrounds came to see it, to touch its trunk, and to feel the peculiar energy it radiated. Many reported experiences of healing, spiritual renewal, or a profound sense of peace they had never known before. In his usual humility, Joshua claimed no credit for what had happened. "It wasn't me," he would say when people thanked him. "It was faith. It was believing when every sign said there was no reason to believe. It was trusting in the invisible, even when the visible seemed to deny all possibility of hope." As word spread, Clearwater Valley shifted from a forgotten, abandoned place to a center of renewal and hope. People from distant regions, enduring their own droughts, literal or otherwise, came in search of inspiration from the story of the old farmer and his miraculous tree. Joshua, now invigorated with new energy, spent his days telling others about his experience. Sitting in the shade of the great tree, he recounted his journey, always emphasizing that the real miracle was not the tree itself, but the faith that had brought it forth. "Faith," he would say in his unhurried voice, "can't be touched or measured. It's a force that comes from within, that's born the moment we decide, against all evidence, that the impossible is merely an opinion, not a fact." Elder Anselm, who had stayed in the valley after the miracle, added his own wisdom to Joshua's teachings. Each of us, he told the seekers who arrived, carries the seed of a miracle inside. Whether that seed blossoms or remains dormant depends on how much faith we devote to watering it every day. In that way, through the story of a simple man who refused to give up, countless others discovered the courage to tackle their own struggles. Joshua's lesson, that true strength is not about avoiding storms but learning to dance in the rain, echoed in the hearts of everyone who heard his tale. The tree in his field, which many began calling the tree of faith, kept growing and thriving, seemingly apart from the usual seasonal changes. Even in the harshest winters, its leaves stayed green and vibrant, a perpetual reminder that for true faith, there is no unfavorable season. When, years later, Joshua finally closed his eyes for the eternal rest, he was laid to rest beneath that very tree. And at the moment his body was returned to the land he had loved so deeply, something extraordinary happened. Hundreds of small seeds burst from the tree, carried by the wind in every direction across the valley. In the following years, new trees, exact copies of the original, began to appear throughout Clearwater Valley, each one sprouting where those seeds had found fertile ground. Along with each new tree came a legend, the story of the old farmer whose faith turned a dying valley into a flourishing oasis of life and hope. Thus, Joshua's lesson outlived him, continuing in the many trees that now dotted the landscape, and more importantly, in the hearts of all who found inspiration in his story. A story that was, at its core, a testament to the transformative power of faith. not as an abstract concept or rigid doctrine, but as a living force capable of creating beauty where there was only desolation. Among the many who came to learn of Joshua's story was a young man named Michael. Unlike most pilgrims, Michael did not seek a cure for an illness or a solution to material problems. He was tormented by a deep doubt, a crisis of faith that gnawed at him like a silent sickness. Raised in a family with strong religious traditions, his time in the city and the disillusionments of adult life had eroded his beliefs, leaving only a void that no philosophy seemed able to fill. Michael arrived in Clearwater Valley on an autumn afternoon, when the leaves of ordinary trees fell in a golden ballet, while the trees of faith remained tall and green, defying the natural seasonal cycle. He watched with a skeptic's gaze groups of visitors reverently touching the trunks, some weeping, others whispering fervent prayers. How can they believe so easily, he wondered, keeping a distance from what he regarded as a collective naivety. Yet he couldn't bring himself to leave. A curiosity beyond logic held him there, an indescribable yearning. On his third night in town, while walking alone under the silver moonlight, he wandered beyond the settlement and found himself before the original tree of faith, the one that had sprouted in Joshua's field, beneath which the old farmer was buried. It was unlike all the others, emanating a gentle glow almost impossible to notice unless one was particularly sensitive, which Michael was in his heightened state of mind. He sat down under its branches, leaning his back against the sturdy trunk. Suddenly, a feeling swept over him, a deep peace he had never known, a connection to something much greater than himself. There were no visions, no celestial voices, no paranormal events, just that overwhelming sense of calm and a certainty that he was not alone in the universe. "It's strange, isn't it?" came a voice beside him, startling him. An elderly woman, her face etched with deep lines but her eyes an intense blue, settled down near him. How something as simple as sitting under a tree can transform our entire view of the world. "Who are you?" Michael asked, surprised by her presence. "My name is Clara. I was among the last people to speak to Joshua before he passed," she said with a gentle smile. "He told me about you." Michael frowned, puzzled. How could he have spoken about me? We never met. He died long before I came here. Clara laughed softly, the sound like tinkling chimes. Joshua had a special gift. It wasn't clairvoyance, as some say. It was deeper, a connection to the invisible web that binds us all. "One day a young man will come," he told me, "carrying as many doubts as I once carried seeds. He'll look for proof, but what he finds will be far more precious, the ability to believe without needing to see." The words struck Michael like waves resonating in his core. "I'm not sure I can believe that," he murmured, more to himself than to Clara. "You don't have to," she replied simply. "Faith can't be forced by arguments or evidence. It's a seed that, once planted at the right time, grows at its own pace, nurtured by our life experiences and the choices we make." They talked through the night beneath the tree of faith. Clara shared her own journey, the times of doubt, crises of faith, and periods when life made no sense at all. Through these honest and imperfect stories, Michael began to understand that genuine faith wasn't about never having doubts. It was about finding the courage to keep going anyway. Joshua used to say, Clara mentioned as dawn's first light tinted the sky, that real faith is not a safe harbor where we hide from life's storms. It's the boat that lets us sail through them, trusting that while we can't control the wind, we can adjust our sails. When Michael finally left Clearwater Valley a week later, he did not have definitive answers for all his questions. What he carried instead was something far more valuable: the realization that the spiritual journey isn't a straight line, but a winding path where each turn, each obstacle, each dark moment is as essential as any flash of clarity or enlightenment. Years later, when Michael returned to the valley with his wife and 2 young children, he had become a writer. His first book, Seeds of Faith, the story of the farmer who transformed a valley, had touched the hearts of thousands around the world. With great emotion, he made his way to the original tree, now more majestic than ever, its branches seeming to reach the entire sky. Clara had passed on, joining Joshua and Elder Anselm in the great mystery that follows this earthly life, but her legacy, like Joshua's, remained alive in that sacred place. Sitting under the tree with his family, Michael closed his eyes, once more sensing the deep connection he'd felt those many years ago. In his heart, he offered silent thanks to the old farmer who, through unwavering faith, had transformed not only a valley but countless lives, including his own. For everyone who faces darkness and despair, seeking a guiding light back to life, Joshua's story endures as a beacon. It reminds us that even when all evidence suggests otherwise, it is still possible to believe. That even when our life's soil seems barren and the rain of grace seems to have abandoned us, planting is still worth the effort. Because the true magic of life is not in avoiding suffering, but in turning it into something beautiful. Not in escaping storms, but in learning to dance in the rain. Above all, not in waiting for the world to change before we truly start living, but in changing how we see the world, finding beauty and meaning even in the most challenging circumstances. Joshua's legacy extended far beyond anything he himself could have imagined. In an increasingly interconnected world, the story of the old farmer spread like the seeds of his miraculous tree. From distant places, people of many cultures and beliefs arrived, all driven by the same need: to discover in themselves the unshakable faith that had rescued not just one man, but an entire region. Among those visitors was a renowned physician who, after years devoted to science and reason, confronted the limits of human knowledge when he lost a patient everyone believed he would save. A professional crisis made him question not only his skills, but the very meaning of his life. In Clearwater Valley, beneath the trees of faith, he didn't find scientific explanations. Instead, he found a deeper understanding that true healing goes beyond medical techniques. It lies in believing in the miracle of life, even when every outward sign suggests otherwise. There was also a young entrepreneur whose financial empire had collapsed overnight, leaving him not only without material resources, but without any sense of purpose. Amid the valley's simplicity, he realized that true wealth isn't measured by a bank account, but by the ability to see meaning in small things, to plant seeds for the future even when the ground seems infertile. A mother, who had lost her only child under tragic circumstances, did not find a magical antidote for her grief in Joshua's tale, but she did find the courage to turn her suffering into a greater purpose. Inspired by the old farmer, she returned to her community and founded a center for orphans, planting seeds of love and hope in every young heart. Thus, Joshua's lesson multiplied, taking shape to meet each person's unique struggles. It wasn't a magic formula or a promise of an effortless life, but an invitation to resilience, a reminder that, as Joshua often said, no one can stop the wind from blowing, but we can all choose how to set our sails. With time, Clearwater Valley came to symbolize that teaching. Formerly barren fields were now lush with vegetation. The trees of faith spread across the valley offered shade and inspiration to anyone who sought a moment of connection with something greater. But the true miracle was never just about those trees, extraordinary as they were. It was about the lives transformed, the stories of perseverance, and the myriad examples of ordinary people who, inspired by the old farmer, discovered within themselves a strength they never thought they had. In a society that increasingly craves quick solutions and often clings to surface-level appearances, Joshua's story offered a necessary counterpoint, a reminder that profound change doesn't happen in an instant, like a magic trick, but through a continuous process of nurturing and faith. Every drop of sweat shed, every moment of doubt endured, every choice to keep going when all seemed lost. Those were the true elements of the miracle. And perhaps the most beautiful aspect of Joshua's legacy was its inclusive nature. It required no special gifts, no lofty education, no great resources to live out its message. The only requirement was a willingness to believe, not blindly, but with that active, transformative faith that had defined Joshua's life. Faith, he often said while sitting beneath his tree, is not a feeling, but a decision. It's choosing to see possibilities where others see only problems. It's knowing that even on the darkest night, the stars are still shining, even if clouds momentarily hide them from our sight. Those simple yet profound words echoed in the hearts of those who truly listened. They didn't offer easy answers to life's greatest mysteries, but instead gave a more meaningful way to live the questions, embracing uncertainty not as an enemy, but as a vital part of the human journey. That is the invitation Joshua's story extends even today, to cultivate the same faith that allowed an old farmer to turn desert into garden. Not a faith that isolates us from life's struggles, but one that gives us courage to face them. Not a faith that denies doubt, but one that teaches us to walk with it without losing hope. Not a faith that guarantees a path without obstacles, but one that shows us how to transform each obstacle into a stepping stone toward our own growth. Because, in the end, external circumstances don't dictate our fate. Rather, it's how we respond to them. And as Joshua's extraordinarily simple life demonstrated, the most powerful answer to adversity is to keep planting, keep believing, keep moving forward, even when in the world's eyes there seems no reason to do so.